Yes.
right? So, and if you look at the food chain, they come from, in general, and this is Dr. Anthony Hulbert, who's great. He has this argument, which is very illustrative. In general, omega-3 coming from greens, right? And then through animals and then consumed by us either directly with the greens. And then the omega-6 in general coming from seeds or grains, either directly or through animals into us.
Yes.
And then if you were to look at the seasonal availability of these things,
Hmm.
they're probably, this would be a great rabbit hole to go down. You would be able to probably shine a light on this more than I would be able to. But there was probably a relative difference in intake through the year
Yes.
when there's
Yes.
more greens available and less greens available.
Absolutely.
So I suspect that our natural flow of the circadian rhythms and the seasonal rhythms of our health and our cells is probably sensitive to even a
Yes.
slight up and down.
Yeah.
I mean that's a hypothesis, but
Yeah.
I'm sure that it would be fruitful if we looked into that. I'm sure
Yeah.
someone has, but
Yeah.
my point is I think that we're probably more sensitive than we even think, right? Because
Yes.
right now we're in what if we're omega-6 overload, we're like what in eternal winter, right? In a
Yes.
sense, we're in a light environment of an eternal summer, in a cell environment of an eternal winter, which is
Yeah.
probably the recipe for disaster.
Yes. I mean, everything is literally out of whack in
Yeah,
probably the worst possible direction, right?
sure.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's a good way of saying it. Like, we're in eternal winter in one sense, but the light environment is telling us just the opposite. And so
yeah.
everything is literally out of sync.
And when we have these kind of conversations, I think that they are there. There's a lot of science-minded folks that are going to be like, okay, we're so many minutes into this. Why aren't you talking about human random controlled trials?
Right.
Because that's all that matters to those folks.
Yep.
I think that one point that we should, because the science mind folks are going to be waiting for this.
Yes.
The the important reason why we're having these conceptual discussions a lot is because the studies haven't been done that should be done, because you have to understand this from certain conceptual levels. For
Yes.
instance, it takes 8 years and so we already established that we're at these, like, at least evolutionarily, these supraphysiological levels of omega-6 in our cells, right?
Right.
Everything from our membranes
Yep.
to
Yep.
our, mitochondria, right on down the line.
You're starting at a baseline that is unprecedented from a
Yes,
natural history
unprecedented.
perspective.
Oh yeah, evolutionarily novel, easy argument to make. Dr. Chris Kenobi really has done a great
Yep.
job of outlining this. I think he really looked into it and found out that the normal level was like 2% or something like that.
Yeah, 2 to 3% is probably, it would be
Yeah,
rare to go
right.
above that probably
Yeah,
in traditional populations.
yeah. So if you're trying to, with human beings, show, okay, well, how does this affect heart disease or
Yes.
disease XYZ? You would have to have a washout period,
Yes.
like to do a proper test, and that takes about 8 years, at
Right.
least in measuring an
Right.
adipose, right?
Right.
And so these conceptual discussions are important, because anytime you look at research, especially human outcome, you can go, well, is that even valid?
Hmm.
Right?
Hmm.
What are we just measuring butter versus margarine, right?
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
you could throw a study out immediately if you're not looking at the principles, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, yeah. I
So
mean,
that's why it's important to
yeah.
to talk about these things.
And I think we'll circle back to a lot of that stuff because I want to talk about RCTs and why certain things are not seen in that literature. And
Yeah.
just to hint at the answer here, the nature of how RCTs are done prevents us from studying certain very large swaths of real biology, because they happen on timescales that are too slow, or because we can't control or measure for certain things.
Yeah.
But you're absolutely right. I think when you look at, I always like to ground this in sort of in nature or an evolutionary ecological perspective, because you said before, look at where we find these polyunsaturated fatty acids in nature. The omega-6s are in things like seeds. That's why we're talking about seed oils. The omega-3s are in things like certain plants, and then certain animals that eat those plants. We talk about the omega-3s found in seafood, for example.
Mhm.
We can't
Yeah.
make these things. The other thing I like to touch on here is look at how these things are packaged in the times and places where you find them in nature. Seeds. What are seeds? they're little shells that are built to protect what's inside of it from
Yeah.
stuff that can, in this case, oxidize the omega-6s. When you look at, say, omega-3s, like why does a fish oil supplement or a fatty fish tissue always come with omega-3s plus vitamin E and antioxidants? Because these things need to be protected from oxidation, because
Yeah.
bad stuff is happening when they
They're
become
so unstable.
oxidized, and bad
Yeah.
stuff means it will break something in cells.
Yeah. And, my role on the internet is to try to hammer what as a clinician, right? I'm face to face with a patient. I think of what could I put out there that if this person heard it in public would put them a leg ahead to start changing their lifestyle,
Yeah.
right? For instance, if you're diagnosed with celiac, well, congratulations, you live in like the best time to be diagnosed with celiac
Right. Right.
because of the legwork that the internet did, right?
Yes.
And
You,
I remember, yeah, you went from Rob Wolf and folks like that talking about celiac disease and gluten. It became a meme, and if it never was a meme, you wouldn't have seen it. If it wasn't like a lifestyle thing, you
yeah.
would not see the market. It would still be a very niche thing, right? It
Yeah.
would
Yeah.
be like,
You wouldn't have the
yeah,
cultural
mhm,
scaffolding to actually make your
yes,
life
yeah,
navigable,
yeah,
if that's a word. And
yeah,
you could be dead right now, or you'd be very,
yeah,
very uncomfortable because
yeah,
no one is
exactly.
accommodating you.
Yeah, exactly. And uh, and so I looked at this seed oil topic, which I think I found. I mean, I remember when I tried to simplify paleo
Hmm.
um, in my head years ago. That there's this one physician. I think he's a inner. What was his name? I'm sorry, but I'm forgetting right now. But he called it the three Neolithic agents of disease, which and this was a blog that he had like 15 years ago. And it was grains, sugar, and industrial seed oils.